Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to our weekly live stream on leadership and culture. I'm Daniela Young, TEDx speaker, Army veteran, and co founder at Cavness HR. I'll tell you all about what Cavness HR is at the end. But today we are going to talk about a book. So this will be a little bit different. The blog post this week, every week we do a blog post about some issue of culture and leadership, and then we discuss it live with comments, if there are any, and sort of deep dive into the issue. One of the things that I do with my clients when we're talking about culture and leadership is I read all of these books on the topic because it is a topic that I am just 100% absolutely and completely obsessed with. And of course, most business leaders are quite busy running their businesses, and they don't have all of the time in the world to read the thousands and thousands of books that are out there. One estimate claims that there's one leadership book published every minute. So, after I finish reading the book, take all the good stuff out of it, I write a book review. It's added to a list. It's something that our clients at Cavness HR have access to. You can read the Daniela notes on the book, get all of the value that's in it right there on the page, and then decide if that's something that you need to go read. So it's a great way to get at least an idea of what you're reading before you read it. So this week I wrote an article about General Stanley McChrystal's book called Leaders, Myth, and Reality. And I wish I had it here so I could show you, but I don't. So you'll have to go look it up for yourself. Phenomenal, phenomenal book. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. As always, you can go to our blog at www.cavnesshr.com/blog to read what I actually wrote. It's also on LinkedIn, on Facebook, etc. So this latest book is really interesting. General McChrystal, of course, has written several books. He's the founder of a leadership consulting group called the McChrystal Group. And before he retired from the military, he was the commander of all the armed forces in Afghanistan. Which is pretty much the highest position in the army. He ended up resigning his post and getting out of the military because of some comments that were made about the then administration of President Obama by members of his team, people that he was in command of. As the leader, he ended up taking responsibility for that. He's written a lot about this in other books. But suffice it to say, Stanley McChrystal is one of those leaders who himself has been both vilified and mythologized. And what he found when he set out to write his own memoirs, and he had a research team doing research for him, he talks about this and he says he thought it would be a straightforward telling of the story because he was there. And he also thought that he was going to come out as the hero of the story. And what he found was that, surprise, surprise, leadership is complicated. It's not all about the leader, and that most of the things we think and believe about leadership today fall under these huge myths. Okay, so the book itself, really interesting. And the biggest thing is that it is fun to read. Not the biggest thing, but we all know that leadership books can be intense and valuable, but sometimes like encyclopedias, where some of them, like The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle or this book by Stanley McChrystal, are just fantastic, so much fun to read because they're telling stories. So the book starts off with Stan McChrystal talking about Robert E. Lee, the general of the Confederate Army, which of course is a controversial topic, especially in the culture that we're in today. He had looked up to to Robert E. Lee his whole life. Robert E. Lee, there's a statue of him at West Point, the U.S. military academy where he went to school many, many years ago, received his commission. He's been a student of Robert E. Lee to the point that he even had a painting of Robert E. Lee hanging in his office everywhere that he went. He starts the story when 30 years later, he's now getting rid of the painting of Robert E. Lee because he's decided that General Lee is no longer a leader that he wishes to mythologize or to emulate. That realization and his realizations about Robert E. Lee sort of bookend the book, and he's the only other leader that's studied that's not paired up, which in my mind is sort of begging you to pair him up with General McChrystal himself and his career as it has gone forward and backwards, with a lot of different nuances, which is a big theme and a big important part of this book. Okay, so to get right into it, the rest of the structure goes, there's 12 leaders, 6 pairs, and they're each grouped up in different and interesting groups, some that we haven't really thought about maybe. So he's got founders, the geniuses, the zealots, the heroes, the power brokers, and the reformers. And he is talking about some very interesting leaders. Actually, let me pull up the list and I will let you know who they all are. So he talks about the founders, he talks about Walt Disney and Coco Chanel. The geniuses is Albert Einstein and Leonard Bernstein. The zealots are Maximilien Robespierre and Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, who, by the way, General McChrystal is credited for killing. The heroes, Zhang He and Harriet Tubman. And the power brokers, William Magyar Boss Tweed and Margaret Thatcher. And the reformers, Martin Luther and Dr. Martin Luther King. He talks about all of their histories, right? So they're like these mini, very well-researched stories of how this person came to be in a leadership role, what was going on, the cultural context of the time, which is very interesting and a big theme in the leadership book as well. And of course, you may have noticed that some of the people that I listed, like Robespierre or like al-Zarqawi, who was the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, are seen as villains, not necessarily leaders. So he is looking across the board. And there's a really great quote that he gives, which is, leadership is neither good nor evil. Leadership is better judged as effective or not. Which is to say, a lot of times we fall under saying good leaders and bad leaders. Churchill was good, Hitler was bad. But in reality, bad leader, somebody you never hear about because nobody follows them. Effective leadership, if you get people to follow you, how does that happen? What is there in that? And he is trying to take a very nuanced look of people that have led large movements or large group of people, whether or not society judges them to be good or bad at the time, much like Robert E. Lee. Okay, then he goes into, at the end of the book, there's 3 myths about leadership. The first is the formulaic myth, that these are all things that we suffer under the impression of when we talk about leadership. So the formulaic myth is the idea that there is this checklist of behaviors, one thing that you need to do, one person that's the expert that can give you this easy checklist. And this myth is so appealing because we love checklists. If you tune into our live streams every day, every week, you will see that I love to do, here's the 5 things you can do. Here's the 3 things you need to know. And we like that. It gives us this satisfying sense of check, check, check. I know how to be. In reality, of course, leadership, far more complicated than that. The second myth is the attribution myth. The idea that the successes or failures of the entire team come from the leaders. And General McChrystal is in this book and has been very, very open and transparent about his journey as a leader and his failures and his successes. So super interesting man to follow. And finally, the results myth is that people that produce results are the people that we want to be our leaders. And McChrystal has learned through a study, a lifelong study of leaders, that so often that is not the case. You can have one person who's producing or likely to produce a great outcome, but a different person who makes us feel good, makes us feel scared, or inspires us to action. And that's the person that we follow. So, all of these myths are things that we think about. They're different leadership theories, different strategies, and basically they're all wrong. So now you're at this point, which is pretty much the end of the book, but it's about midway through my review, where you're like, well, if everything that we've known about leadership is wrong, everything that we've been taught, everything that has been published in the last 100 years, which has been known as the decade of leadership, the century of leadership, then, what does that mean? What are we supposed to do? What is left for leadership? And that's pretty much the exact question that this book is asking of us. There's not a lot of neat answers. There's a lot of scholarship. There's a lot of really difficult, hard questions. And in my opinion, his thesis is summed up as most of what we've been taught about leadership is not wrong, but it's one-sided, it's simplified, and sometimes it's just wrong. He defines leadership at the end of the book as leadership is a complex system of relationships between leaders and followers in a particular context that provides meaning to its members. And he very specifically talks about how even if you picked one leader and studied them and emulated them perfectly in a different cultural context with a different group of people, there is no guarantee that you will be successful or be able to reproduce what was going on at that time, in that moment in history with those people. So very personal, very complex. Obviously, this is nothing new to any of us that have been in leadership. So why should we care? I'll tell you why I care. And if you follow me, you probably know this already. But I have been, struggling with leadership throughout my life and trying to understand it. And this idea that leadership is neither good nor evil, but effective, what we need to study, really struck out to me. Because when I say I've been studying and watching leaders my entire life, I mean, from the time I was born in a crazy religious cult called the Children of God, with lots of dynamic, strong, effective leaders who controlled our lives. And over the past few years, I've been wondering why, to this day, nobody has really studied the founder, David Berg, from the perspective of leadership. They've studied him from, oh my God, he created this horrible cult. How do we avoid cults? Some of those things. But nobody has really looked at this full picture for him and for many other evil leaders that look at, this was a dynamic and engaging man. He convinced 100,000 people to follow him over 50 years, including to remain 1,000% dedicated to him after he was dead, to give up their creature comforts, live in poverty, dedicate their lives to him, travel the world preaching about God. He definitely crossed the line into evil, into what we think that people should ever follow, when he started evangelizing prostitution and pedophilia and polygamy and many other things. So, but there was still something there, right? There was something, and I've been asked for the past 17 years of my life, ever since I escaped from the cult, how is that possible? How do people follow that man? And I have been trying to answer this question and trying to learn. And so this book to me was just mind-blowing, gave me a lot of rhetoric for questions that I want to ask, ways that I want to talk about leadership, things that my clients have been asking me, and just important, interesting conversations that we need to have. And by the way, if you do want to know more about my story, you can look up narratively.com and check out an article that I wrote recently about sort of the journey and that life and cult and military and all of the cool stuff. The links, of course, will also be in the blog post. So, McChrystal asked this question in the book, which is a question that I've been asking, is a question that I want to ask here and now. is how does leadership take people to dark places? And I think asking that question is so important. And I think the flip side of the dark places are the good places, and the flip side of the good places are the dark places. So when we're studying leadership, we are studying all of those things. This, book is super interesting to me at this time in history right now. And for the record, any and all sorts of political innuendo is only from me. The book is very nonpartisan. So whatever side of the political map you're on, you can learn a lot from this book. Pretty sure everyone profiled is dead. But I think that it's very interesting from a political perspective or from a national perspective, because we are at a time where people are asking what leadership should be, and people are looking at what we've always seen of as leaders and either turning them on their heads or wondering if we should turn them on their heads. There are some people saying the age of leadership is over. So what is it? What is going on? And I think that at the end of the day, the closer that we study leaders in the context that they were leading in gives us a much deeper understanding of this subject as complex as leadership. I know that for me, I am on a very specific side of the political spectrum, but the more I have been spending, you guys, I spent like 3 months reading this book, like deeply, deeply reading this book and thinking about it and writing quotes and writing about it. Not to mention doing my own research, writing my own book, which follow me on Twitter. I just signed an agent. So, maybe in the next year or two, the book will come out. But I have found myself, let's say, hating a bit less and understanding a bit more and seeing things that I don't agree with politically and leaders that I used to basically straight up just revile as an interesting, effective leader operating in the context that they are leading in. And this is one of the dangers of saying good, bad, evil, great, is that it makes it so easy to just wipe everything away and not look at what is actually effective, what is actually happening, what is actually going on here. Which, of course, to bring this back to small businesses and small business leaders, this is a question that's so important for us to be asking every day as we're building our cultures, as we're developing leaders and the leaders under us. The things that were effective for leadership 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even last year, probably not going to be effective going into the future. So my biggest recommendation about this book is not like you're going to learn X, Y, and Z. It's just that it is going to force you to ask some of these questions. It's going to force you to look at, 12 relatively famous, there's one I'd never heard of, but relatively famous leaders in a completely different perspective. He is not supporting or vilifying any of these leaders. He is just research, presenting, and then looking through the scope of different cultural contexts and how they were operating at the time. And the way he pairs up two of them makes that even more obvious as you get to compare and contrast in each chapter. And then there's sort of learnings or outcomes at the end. So, all in all, I really hope that you read this book. I really hope that you read and enjoy my review of this book, and share it if you enjoy it. We really appreciate that. I definitely recommend reading it with like a notepad next to you and a pen, because, oh my God, I wrote over 8 pages front and back of quotes while I was reading this book. Down into my little quote book where I can have them forever. And I will promise you now, I'm going to be like talking and writing about this book and a bunch of the stuff that I do for like a long, long time. So you're going to hear about it again. I've, of course, also tagged General McChrystal in all of the social media on all of this stuff. So fingers crossed, maybe he will respond to me. My goal, for those of you who know that I have like tiny, small goals all the time, is that one day, former Captain Daniela Young is going to author a book with General Stanley McChrystal, because that's coming. So stay tuned. And that is about the wrap up of our time today. I'm going to check real quick on Facebook to see if we do have any questions. And I'm not seeing it. So I think that we're probably good to close out. I promised to tell you again a little bit more about Cavness HR. So recently I went from partner to co-founder of this HR tech company called Cavness HR, whose mission is to bring big business level HR, make it available for small businesses. We're doing this in a really exciting way of creating SaaS products, software as a service, tech products for things that are usually done in big businesses by either a full-time HR person or a consultant. So think of your employee onboarding, offboarding, employee handbooks, job descriptions, HR posters, a lot of these things that you need to know and understand as you're building your business, as well as traditional consulting services like building your culture map and your strategy and your culture briefs and how you're going to plan your leadership development programs, hopefully even some team building products that can make it easy for managers or business leaders to plan their own customized events at their various organizations. So stay tuned. We have some exciting stuff coming out November, December, etc. Of course, we also have our wonderful podcast, Cavness HR Podcast, which I host a portion of, Cavness HR Culture and Leadership Podcast. So you can follow us on all social media. We do a lot of content, a lot of videos, a lot of tips. And like I always say at the end of my live stream, if there was anything here you loved, please reach out and let us know. If there was anything here that you hated, even more, please reach out and let us know, because I love to discuss and debate and have my ideas and my assumptions challenged, because that is what leadership and culture and lifelong learning is all about. So thank you so much. Once again, I'm Daniela Young, TEDx speaker, Army veteran, and co-founder at Cavness HR, with hopefully a book coming out soon. Please connect with me on LinkedIn, connect with me on Facebook, and just remember, no leader is perfect. No culture is perfect. Just do your best to be great every day. Thank you, and have a wonderful week.